And suddenly one of the car doors flew open right in my path. And I had nowhere to go. There's this lady trying to get out of her car, and she was carrying 4 large McDonald's drinks. And she was trying to get out of her car. She just opens the door, and it's right in my way. And the edge of the door, like I had my hands on the handlebars, the edge of the door caught me right between my knuckles, like on the handlebar. And so the door like swings my handlebars around. If you know anything about how bikes steer, when my right handlebar moved, obviously I just went over the handlebars and I fell hard on the concrete and kind of a little big mess. And I was bleeding and stuff. And none of her 4 large McDonald's drinks spilled a single drop. I'll just mention that. But immediately she rose out of the car firing. She was fighting mad. She starts yelling. She says, "Why didn't you look where you're going? Why are you going so fast?" She says, "I had the door open a crack. You should have seen that before I opened it the whole way." She was going on and on. And I knew it was clearly her fault, at least mostly. I think people should always check their mirrors. In the city, you should check your mirror, see what's happening. But anyway, when she took a breath, I jumped in to prove my point. But instead of doing that, I apologized, and I actually just said, "I'm sorry, are you okay? Like, is your door okay?" Anyway, and it was funny because when I said that, she kind of sucked in her breath and stopped for a second, like she was going to say something more. And she was stunned. She was kind of amazed, I think, I wasn't screaming back at her. And she was a little bit humiliated, I think, for not caring about me and just yelling. And so her attitude flips 180 degrees. She became the softest, gentle person ever. And she croons at me. She's like, no, I should be checking if you're okay. And she just did a whole flip. And I honestly think like the soft answer kind of humiliated her a little bit and kind of called out some injustice that maybe she was having. But I had a part to play. Obviously, I was biking too fast probably. But when faced with a choice of whether I would be outwardly angry and blame her for not checking her mirror, I decided to think about how Jesus responded to injustice. And I don't honestly know. I'm pretty sure I don't act that way most times. A lot of the time, I probably would respond sarcastically instead of lovingly. But my model for how to respond in that situation should be Jesus. I believe Jesus is God, and he showed us the perfect way of being human. So my question today is, what can we learn about Jesus' integrity as he related to injustice? And you could take this a whole bunch of different directions. Today, I want to look at Jesus and how he responded to the government of his time. Unjust oppressors, the Romans, and how Jesus responded to injustice in the government, how he responded to the government. And this is a tense topic, obeying the government. How do we respond? It's a loaded topic. We usually don't bring it up. You might have bad experiences with authority in the past. You probably had church leaders that hurt you. Maybe I've hurt you. You probably have fathers that hurt you. Governments that have been unjust. And this might cause you to just close your ears as soon as I mention anything about government. But I encourage you, today this is not a do this better, I'm not being really hard on you for not following the government perfectly. What I want you to do, though, instead is to look at Jesus with me. Look at how he responded to injustice from the government. Look at how he handled questions about his government and see how we can apply that model to our lives. You might feel anxious by this idea that we should obey the government. You might think, how perfectly do I need to obey? I'm already following everything I know how to. Am I living in sin? If this is you, I hope that today you'll see Jesus' love and grace that he has for you, even though you know you'll never live up to his perfection. So my goal today is to look specifically at how Jesus related with governmental authority of his day. Did he respond by yelling back at the lady with the drinks that opened her door in my way? We're going to specifically focus on Jesus' obedience and not discuss special situations with the government like voting or serving in war or holding political offices or any of that stuff. We're mostly just going to look at Jesus and how he related with his government. And today, we'll see that obeying the government is not just another in a long list of rules that God wants us to follow. Instead, this type of surrender gets to the very heart of who Jesus is and was, and is the very reason that Jesus is the type of king that I could trust. because of what he said about the government. Instead of responding to the government with mockery, vengeance, or rebellion, Jesus exposed injustice with suffering love, courageously revealing that he knew where the government's authority really came from. We have three main points: a king under Caesar, a king who redefined power, and a king worth honoring. And the title is Paul Miller's Law, and we'll get to that later if that's confusing to you. So first, a king under Caesar. You know, Jesus was a king, like the rightful king, but he was under the Roman Emperor Caesar. Jesus is God. He created the world, and he comes to the world born as a baby, God with us, and he took his royal heavenly robes, he took them off, and he allowed himself to be wrapped up with smelly cloths and laid in a manger. And the creator and the king, the rightful king, humbled himself to a fussy, messy, vulnerable baby. And that's the king. Jesus was rightfully king, and he decided to take that off and not remove his kingship, but come under and come vulnerably. And Jesus' setting, like that he was born into, a lot of you know this, but I mean, imagine the setting. He was the true king of the world. How did he grow up? He began to understand what his surroundings were and the government around him. He grew up in Israel, but it wasn't the same Israel with King David and Solomon, righteousness and justice. No. This was an Israel where 70 years ago, an army from 1,000 miles away invaded, completely took over the country, and now was like ruling the government, ruling the police system. It's the same thing. Hopefully this doesn't bring up fears. It's the same thing as if China would just completely overrun America, set up a police structure. You go outside, any cop that stops you is Chinese. Okay? You go in the government, all the people making laws are from China, 1,000 miles away. Okay? It's as if we were completely occupied by the Chinese and they ran the government. That's the government Jesus was dealing with, because the Italians were from 1,000 miles away. And these Italian Romans, they imposed heavy taxes. They weren't even fair. They were heavy taxes. A lot of people lived in poverty in Jesus' day because the taxes were so oppressing. And that was even worse because the tax collectors cheated and made them pay even more. Jesus probably grew up poor because of the unfair taxes. The Romans under this emperor Caesar, they were brutal. They would torture, they would kill people. Anybody who said a hint of a thing against them, they're gone. You can't just be posting stuff on social media. You say anything that's harmful to the government, you're lined up outside the city hanging on a cross. And that really happened. They crucified thousands of people. But then out of the earshot of the Romans, what do you think people talked about? The young Jesus, he's talking with his buddies, you know. What do you think they had to say about the Romans? His buddies, right? They were like, oh yeah, no, they're good. I think they mostly have our good in mind. Like, I mean, yeah, they're good. They're cool. I doubt it. I mean, do people say that about our own presidents? And they're our own nationality. He probably heard his friends kind of making fun of them or saying, hey, I got away with this. Did you know what I did? I played a prank on them and made them look dumb. He might have heard his older followers of Yahweh, though, come in and remind the young ones that God had promised that a Messiah would come and deliver Israel. So ironically, Jesus himself is the rightful king of the world, the Messiah. The emperor is not the king of the world. Jesus is, and he was a king under Caesar. If you think today America, the politics are unstable, Jesus lived in an even more polarizing, intense time. So Jesus was growing up in this situation. I know we know this, but it's really important to take what he says about the government in context with how he grew up. He grew up under an oppressive regime from someone who's foreign, that they did not deserve to be in Israel. They took them over, they conquered them, and they were imposing all their laws on the Israelites. So what did Jesus think about the government? I want to look at a couple passages. There's actually not that many, but a couple where Jesus mentions the government and kind of how he wants people to relate with them. And of course, this is a huge tense time, and there was a lot of times these, as Jesus got more popular, the religious leaders would try to trap him, right? And the religious leaders couldn't legally kill Jesus themselves, but if they could trap him saying something bad about Rome, then they got him. So a lot of the times they would ask him stuff about the government to see what his opinions were, and if it was, he said the wrong thing, he could get killed by Rome. So one of the first things I want you to look at with me is in Mark 12. I have to turn to it myself. Mark 12 is a famous passage where, let's see if I got it right here. Mark 12:13, where they bring up paying taxes. And remember I said that paying taxes were a heavy burden. They were not fair, and honestly, the taxes went to fund the actual people who were hurting them. So a lot of reasons why you'd not want to pay taxes. And what does Jesus say? I'm not going to read this whole thing, but looking in verse 13, they ask him about taxes, and they say, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And they weren't saying lawful like Roman law. They were saying, is it God's law to pay taxes to Caesar? Should we pay them or should we not? And then Jesus says, he's knowing their hypocrisy. He says to them, verse 15, why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius, a coin, and let me look at it. And they brought a coin, and he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Jesus said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at that. What's Jesus say? He says, give him your money. Pretty much, right? Just says, give him your money. He says they have the right to control taxes. He says, give him your money. They used this money to keep their foot on the neck of Jesus. And he says, pay taxes. They deserve that. But then the funny part is here, it gets a little, he flips it. And he doesn't just say, pay Caesar what Caesar owes. He says, give to God the things that are God's, which kind of subtly implies that Caesar's not the true king, right? So he is kind of saying Caesar's not the true king and God really is. But he's saying pay Caesar taxes. Pay the emperor taxes. Give him your money. Caesar has the right, Jesus is saying, to ask for taxes. This is so tricky. What if the government funds programs that we don't support? What if the government is going into a war that we don't support and we feel like is unjust? And what if our money goes to promote sexual freedom in ways that don't align with the Bible? What if our money goes to kill people? Some Anabaptist groups have actually tried to refuse war taxes. And they try to figure out the percentage that the government spends on the military and said they'll pay up to that, but not that percentage. And there's been Anabaptist groups that have tried that. It's not legal, but they say that their conscience can't let them give that money. And I understand that. That's a very tricky situation, especially if we were in an active wartime. Like, I don't even know what I would think if it was a little more tense like World War II was. And that's courageous that they would do that. But Jesus didn't really give that caveat. At least I don't think so. The Romans had a brutal military regime. I'm sure a lot of the taxes went to fund their military. And their regime wasn't even a just war. It was conquest and domination and control. Jesus' coins paid for the spear that would pierce his side as he hung on the cross. So I'm in favor of finding creative ways to not support wartime killing. But it seems to me like refusing to pay taxes to avoid supporting war is not what Jesus did. So this is tough. I told you this was a tough one, right? It's a tough one. It's challenging. But let's just look at what Jesus did and see how that leads us. How would Jesus respond, though, when he was put on trial in front of a Roman governor for something he didn't do? Let's look at John 19 to see how Jesus responds to that. So here, these evil Romans, he's in front of them. He's being accused of all kinds of stuff. He's being accused of saying he was a king. Ironically, he was the king, but he wasn't saying that. He wasn't trying to overthrow Rome. So he's on trial in front of Pilate. And John 19, Pilate and the Roman governor, they had legitimate power. Jesus says he's acknowledged their power before. And what does Jesus say? The classic line in John 19:11, talking to Pilate, and Pilate, actually in verse 10, Pilate says, don't you know I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? And Jesus doesn't deny that he has that power. He does. He actually does have the authority to crucify him. He can do it legally. And Jesus said that's actually fair. He does have the authority. Jesus doesn't deny that, but he says in verse 11, you wouldn't have any authority. You would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given you from above. Yikes. So he's saying two things, right? He's saying, first of all, that the authority Pilate has is legitimate. He has the right to do how to uphold the law. But he says you wouldn't have any of that authority. You'd be nothing if it wouldn't have been God who allowed you to have that. Pretty courageous thing to say. This is not weakness. He's not just rolling over to the government. He is courageously promoting God as the true king in this situation, actually. But he's still acknowledging the authority that Pilate has as a legitimate source of authority. But he's challenging Pilate's perception. He's challenging Pilate's perception that he can get what he wants through power. And Jesus is saying, no, true power, there's a true power above you who is allowing you to serve here. Pretty courageous thing to say by Jesus. Jesus acknowledged that the government does have authority given by God himself to make laws about money with the taxes and society and to judge the way Pilate was doing. And God's going to hold the government accountable for, ways that they don't promote justice for all. But ultimately, Jesus, he's the rightful king of the world. He actually chose to be a king under Caesar and submit to his laws, which I find crazy. So the first point was Jesus is a king, a rightful king, but under Caesar. He chose to be under Caesar. Second point is a king who redefined power. How did Jesus redefine power? He already did a little bit by making bold claims like that, like to Pilate. He says, you wouldn't have any power except God gave it to you. That's already redefining power. But I want you to look at a passage in Matthew where Jesus redefines power by asking his disciples to do something. Go to Matthew 5:41. I promise this is the last time I'm making you flip around. Matthew 5:41, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. We're just looking at examples on how Jesus related with authority, right? Looking at our true example, looking at the ways he related with authority, specifically the government. So, Matthew 5:41, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, the way of life that Jesus lived and the way of life he calls us to live. He's talking about retaliation, getting back at people. And he says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. And a lot of you have probably heard this was the Roman soldiers' right. They actually had that right to just find someone along a path and stop them and conscript them to go carry their pack, their luggage, with them 1 mile in whatever direction they wanted. So they could be walking north, and if a poor old Jewish man could be walking south, and they could say, stop there, old Jewish man, carry this 50-pound pack, and go backwards the way you came for 1 mile. And he had to do it. And this was kind of their right. It's not clear whether it was an actual law or not, but they had the authority to do this. And Jesus says, but it wasn't fair though, was it? That's not fair at all. Why strong, young, 22-year-old Roman soldier has a nice, big, broad shoulders, he can carry his backpack, and he meets an old man and he says, carry my pack for me the wrong way? And what if the guy was going somewhere? Obviously he was, right? So what if the guy's going to be late? Yeah, this is not just. There's actually an example of when this happened. In the Bible, remember when Jesus was carrying his cross, but he fell and he was too weak to carry it? And then the Roman soldiers conscripted a guy, Simon of Cyrene, to carry the cross? That's the same word, the same law. They could just do that. They could just make someone carry something for up to 1 mile. I have to wonder why, right? Why did Jesus ask his followers to carry the evil Roman stuff double what is required of them? Double the distance. He didn't even just say, oh yeah, go the mile, just bow your back and do that. Just do the mile, don't complain. He says go 2. And that's crazy. And that's not even how we use that phrase nowadays. We say go the extra mile. We're talking about serving our friends usually, right? Someone goes the extra mile for someone. It's when they, go all out with a meal that they prepared for you. That's not going the extra mile. Not this way. This going the extra mile is responding to an unjust situation by foreign invaders that had taken over your country and willingly and voluntarily going more than what they asked, including to the point of inconveniencing yourself. Why did he say this? Why didn't he just say, do what's asked? This is crazy to me. This is the foundational verse of all the ones we looked at how to relate to governmental authority, because it was an unjust government, it was an unjust law, and he didn't just say do it. He said do it double the distance. Why did he do that? Did he just say it so his followers would make sure to fully obey the government? Sort of like if he would say, okay, everybody go 10 under the speed limit. Now make that 20 under the speed limit. Okay, everybody? Whatever the speed limit is, subtract 20, go that speed. Is that what Jesus is saying? He's just trying to make sure we don't accidentally go over. It's a 25-mile-an-hour zone, so 5 miles an hour. Is that what Jesus is saying? No, look at the surrounding verses. He's talking about retaliation and loving enemies and doing stuff that humiliates and shames our enemy for the injustice that they have. Is this just about following the rules? No, right? This is about how to respond to injustice. But if the Romans were being unfair, then why didn't Jesus say to just do the minimum? Just get by. Why did he have to up the ante? Why didn't he just say, since this practice was clearly unjust, why didn't he say, if you can get away with it, run away? If you see one coming, run off to the hills. Why didn't he say that? Because he doesn't like injustice. Why didn't he say that'd be a great way, run off to the hills, and that way it'd be a great way to talk to your friends and lift your chin up later and say, I refuse to bow to oppression today, and, I kind of thumbed my nose at the Romans, and they got what they deserved, and that guy can't make me walk a mile. I know a cave, and I saw him coming, saw the glint of his armor, and I ran off and watched him walk past. They can't make me carry their dirty gear. Imagine the slaps on the back you'd get when you share that with your friends, right? Yeah, buddy, stick it to them. They deserve it. See, people living under this Roman occupation, they would have been humiliated to carry these heavy packs, turn around, the soldiers just kind of walking behind them casually, joking around and kind of making fun of these poor Jews and stuff. And they're just carrying these heavy packs the wrong way, and the Romans are just strolling along. Isn't that humiliating? That's really humiliating. Do you get how shocking this is, what Jesus said? Do you get what his hearers would have heard when he says, if a soldier would make you go 1 mile, instead go 2, voluntarily? That does not make sense. That's dumb, right? That is kind of dumb. It doesn't even make sense. Why would I want to follow that? Why do I even want to follow a Jesus who's that weak that he just says, go twice the distance when the Roman soldiers ask you? Doesn't he care about justice? Doesn't he want to just overthrow these people? Doesn't he see that I have stuff to do and I have a bad back? So why did he say to offer to carry this second mile? Did he do it? Did he suggest that as a way to expose injustice and humiliate the perpetrators? Look at this context. Turning the other cheek, giving someone your coat when they already took your shirt. They already exploited you. You give them your coat and your shirt, and you're standing there bare-chested, shivering in front of them, exposing them for their greed. Imagine some gruff young Roman soldiers just dump their packs rudely on some poor townspeople. And, they're going and they get to that mile. They played a game and they saw how much luggage they could kind of teeter on some old man's back. And when they got to the mile, the soldiers say, all right, that's your mile. And the old man keeps walking past the marker, right? He keeps plodding past. He's shaking. It's so heavy. And now the Roman soldier's kind of feeling a little weird. He says, like, did you hear me, old man? Like, we're at the mile. He keeps going. It's a dusty, hot path. And then the soldiers shout, hey, that's a mile. Stop now. But now he's kind of feeling weird to order the guy to stop. But the old man keeps plodding on with these packs on his back. Imagine how uncomfortable the soldier would feel. Usually the Jews were the ones being humiliated, but now the soldier feels like a fool. Does he really think he's powerful because he can boss a thin, elderly man around? By continuing to walk past the marker, the old man redefined power. Maybe the Roman soldier's getting even nervous. Maybe he's like, I could get in trouble for this. Like, what if someone sees me abusing this old man past the mile requirement? What if someone sees that, or someone hears about it, or he tells somebody about it? What if he tells my commanding officer? Like, I could get in trouble for this. Now the one who holds all the cards of power is who? Now the old man holds all the cards of power. Jesus is redeeming power, and he's putting it into the hands of these helpless people, but not by trying to wrestle the Roman soldier, but by suffering love. Jesus has redefined power, not as thoughts of revenge or longings for just someday you'll catch one in a bad situation, but as humiliating injustice by exposing it. Teaching on going the second mile isn't the only way Jesus redefined power. He also rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. He created civil disturbance by upending tables. But Jesus is showing God as the ultimate authority, and that true power doesn't come by having swords and spears, but it comes by humble love. How did he ultimately redefine power? How did Jesus ultimately show humble, suffering love? How did he defeat the power of all the evil forces, the parasite of sin, the conniving, hypocritical religious leaders? How did he defeat all these evil powers? He gave himself, right? He gave himself in suffering love on the cross, humiliating evil forever, unmasking it for the sham and the injustice evil is. In the cross, Jesus attracted every force of evil intent into one spot, into one point. And I heard someone say one time, it was like all evil was in the crosshairs, right? And once it was all bound up together, all attacking this one perfect, sinless, spotless lamb, and evil was in the crosshairs, he destroyed it once and for all, forever. And he destroyed it through suffering love, through that willing giving. He didn't destroy evil by fighting evil with evil's own weapons. He destroyed evil through love. And God raised him from the dead because he died even though he was sinless. And God raised him from the dead and gave him victory over the biggest weapon that evil has, which is what? Death, right? God gave him victory over the biggest weapon, the biggest threat they have, which is death. And he rose Jesus from the dead. Jesus redefined power, not by using force and coercion to get his way, not by figuring out some way to trick the Romans or get back at them or overthrow them with force. Jesus redefined power by modeling submission to God's will and through love, breaking the power of death. So Jesus was a king who was under Caesar willingly, and he was a king who redefined power. Redefined power by making shocking statements like going a second mile. Lastly, Jesus is a king who is worth honoring. So when we talk about obeying the government, it's not really about that. The government is the government. That's not the point. The point of that obeying the government idea is about honoring our true king, Jesus. That's the point. Jesus says he'll be the one who eventually put all earthly rulers under his feet. He's going to one day put the foot on the neck of the Romans, the metaphorical Romans, right? And he's going to reign as king on the earth. And so in the meantime, Jesus is saying, I've given authority to these earthly people. Yeah, they're messed up, but he's chosen to do that. He's working in that way in the world. And so he gives the authority that he really has. And so when we want to honor Jesus, when we need to honor the government, we need to remember that we are actually honoring our true king, Jesus. Peter reinforces this. Peter says, be subject to every institution, but be subject to every institution for whose sake? The Lord's sake. And not just because God commands you to, because God put that in place. Paul echoes this crystal clear language in Romans 13. Let every person be subject to governing authorities. There's no authority except God. So it's not about obeying the government, it's about recognizing who is the true authority. And let's look to Jesus today. Let's look and see what he did, right? He said to go the extra mile, to humiliate injustice with suffering love. He said to pay taxes, even though they weren't fair taxes. And he boldly tells Pilate that, just remember, you have authority, yeah, but God is the one that gave you that authority. Jesus gave honor to the government, but he also challenged their authority. He told his followers not to just obey unjust laws, but to expose them for the shameful abuse of power that they were. So how can we learn from Jesus' way? Jesus' response to an unjust government might seem weak. I've heard plenty of people say, like, it's just weak to not stand up for your rights, or to, I don't want to follow a Jesus who's just like that. He's just going to like lay over, pay taxes, be a doormat. I've heard people say, I don't want to be a doormat. Jesus doesn't want me to be a doormat. Don't be a doormat and carry a Roman's luggage 2 miles instead of 1. I'm going to refuse to be a doormat and only do 1 mile. Jesus doesn't say a word to defend himself when he's crucified. If Jesus is supposed to be king, do I want to follow a weak king like that? But think about it again. Think about power in your life. Right now, think about people in your life, authority, that have hurt you. Okay? Think about authority that's hurt you. Think about parents, school administrators, teachers, pastors, government. Think about authority in your life that has hurt you. I guarantee you have one. Okay? We all have wounds from authority. And they might have been abusive, manipulative, they broke your trust, they were greedy, they were arrogant, unjust, impatient, corrupt, all these things, right? But what kind of a leader could you follow? Do you want a strong leader? What kind of a leader do you want to follow? Think about leaders you've read in stories, movies, books. What kind of a leader do you look up to and anybody would want to follow? Isn't it someone who would be humble, honest, courageous, fair, self-sacrificing? Don't you want to follow a kind leader, relatable, clear, and focused? King Jesus showed every one of those characteristics in his life of a good leader, not just by what he said, but how he lived. And King Jesus, is the perfect king. He's the rightful king, but he's the perfect one too. He's not a weak leader. He's a strong leader. But he's also a humble leader, fair, kind, relatable, loving. Jesus is the perfect king. So if Jesus is a king deserving honor, how do we show honor to King Jesus? There's lots of ways to honor King Jesus, right? I want to just focus on one thing today. We don't have much time. I'll let the Spirit convict in other ways. But it seems clear in looking how Jesus related to the government that one way we can honor the true King Jesus is by honoring the people he put in place as our government. And this gets really tricky. And I don't mean to have this all figured out at all. I need lots of grace. There's plenty of times I don't honor the government. We all have trauma from that. We have trauma from whatever. But I just want to ask you, what did Jesus do? How did he model relating with the government? And don't I want to follow a king like Jesus? One that's kind and fair and just and courageous. We currently are blessed to live under a government who has a lot of laws that reflect God's law, like against murder or stealing or whatever. But a lot of the time, we fully support these laws, but what happens if the law is unjust or unfair, or we think that the law is unreasonable? And this comes up a lot, and this really hits home if you're like, that's just a dumb law. It just doesn't make sense. And maybe it doesn't. Maybe it is a dumb law. And what if it affects your work? And what if it affects your income? And I get that. This is tough. We'll talk more about that later. But in reality, since God gave governments the right to make laws, and he asks us to follow them unless the law directly opposes God's way, when we honor our government, we are honoring our true King Jesus. And actually, in a flip way of saying that, dishonoring the ones who God allowed to have power is the same as dishonoring our King Jesus. So how do we honor our King? We remember that Jesus gave us kings, and he's asking us to follow his pattern that he laid out for us in relating with the government. This is so tough, though. I think this is a journey thing. I don't think I have it perfectly figured out. I'm challenged and convicted all the time about this. But I want this to draw you back, not to a hammer that says, you do this, you do that, why aren't you doing this better? But look at Jesus. I want you to just focus on Jesus. You should want to do that if you're a follower of him. Look back to Jesus and look at how he showed what it means like to be a king and what he did for us and how he responded to the government. And ask him to help you follow that better. So Jesus stunned his hearers with the idea to volunteer to go the extra mile. So how does our obeying the government kind of go above and beyond like Jesus asked? Well, for starters, I volunteer to pay double in taxes. No, I'm just kidding. But, I mean, it does mean not cheating on the taxes, right? It does mean not hiding cash income that you get because the government doesn't deserve my money anyway, right? I mean, at least that, right? That's like going half a mile, honestly. Not cheating is like going half a mile. No, I'm just thinking through this, right? How can we honor the government because of who Jesus is as our true king? I'm going to pick on something here. Give me some grace, okay? Okay. I'm going to pick on something just because I know it's an example that affects everybody. It affects me. And I think it is a measure of how much of your heart is surrendered to the true King Jesus, okay? I'm not going to say it grades you on a scale or whatever, but it's something you can look at to see where is my heart in surrender to Jesus, the true King. Okay, so give me a little grace. What about traffic laws? What about traffic laws? This is tough, okay, because they're not fair. But honestly, evaluate your heart for a second. I'm not judging you. I know it's impossible. It's impractical to follow every traffic law. I get that. I'm not hanging around behind the church with a speed gun, watching everybody leave church, and also, checking their speed. They're 1 mile an hour over. I mean, I did tell them. No, and Jesus isn't doing that either, right? But the question is, when you think about that, do you just get angry and you get like, how does he think he's talking about traffic laws? That's just dumb. They don't have a right to do that anyway, and what does it even matter? Well, what it matters is not the traffic law. It doesn't even matter whether you're following the government or not specifically. That's not the main point. The main point is, who are you honoring as your king? Is it yourself? Okay, because if it's yourself and you're saying like, I can choose best and God doesn't need to tell me what to do, who are you acting like? If you're saying I can choose best, that is the lie that Adam and Eve believed, right? It goes all the way back. It's the lie Adam and Eve believed. I know better, right? And as soon as you say that I know better thing, that's that piece of your heart that isn't quite surrendered. And we all have a piece of our heart that's not surrendered. I'm not saying I'm better than you with that. The reason I'm saying this is so important is because a disregard for stuff like traffic laws and just an arrogance and an I know better attitude, that is exposing that little piece of your heart that you're not ready to give up to the true King. That's why it matters, okay? It's not because of speed limits matter that much. And it's not about whether you're following it to the exact letter or whatever. What I'm getting at is, what is your heart posture, right? What's your heart posture toward ideas like government or following laws, like traffic laws? The rightful king of the world, Jesus, gave our government the right to make laws to keep us safe, even if you don't agree. And every time I realize I'm going too fast, it's not about like, oh man, I sinned. I'm living in sin again. I live in sin every day. This is just dumb. Like, I can't help it. It was a hill, you know. That's not the point. But think about it this way. If I remember this on Monday, maybe you'll remember it. If you remember it on Monday and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going too fast again. I was distracted. I got a heavy foot. What you should do is say, you know what? I have the chance now, not the chance to obey. That's not the main point. I have a chance to remember who I'm really following when I slow down. Who am I really following? Who am I acknowledging as king of the world when I choose to slow down 5 miles an hour? Oh yeah, I'm reminding myself, you know what? I'm following the government because Jesus is the true king. He's going to be the true king of the whole earth, and he gave them that authority to make that law. And I'm going to do it just because I want to remind myself that Jesus is actually in charge. Isn't that a little bit of a flip train of thought for you? None of us can follow these laws perfectly. But ask yourself, is my heart surrendered to what I want to do? And am I willingly taking up my cross daily and following Jesus? This is not a one-time decision. This is every time you notice it and saying like, there's that part of my heart again that wants to do what I want to do. And Jesus is true king. So why is the sermon titled Paul Miller's Law? Well, this is actually what inspired my sermon today. Is I was driving along and I keep getting these ads. I don't know why. Maybe I clicked on it one time. There's a thing called Paul Miller's Law. Have you seen it? It's a thing. It's a new law in Pennsylvania. And yeah, I don't just make a habit like Nevin does of getting a cup of hot tea and cuddling up and reading the law every night. Just reading law code and sections 8 and section 9, and I don't just do that for fun. But there's one called Paul Miller's Law. I understand it's named after a guy named Paul Miller who was tragically killed in a car accident. And he was killed with a tractor-trailer driver who was using his phone when he hit him. And so there were 2 deputies, 2 state troopers that knocked on this lady's door, Eileen Miller, in the middle of the night to tell her that her son was killed. And she says, this is a quote from the mom of this guy that was killed. She says, "My son did everything right. He was killed by someone else's unsafe choices behind the wheel." And so there's this law that's effective now, effective in June, Paul Miller's Law, and it's prohibiting the use of any handheld phone while you're driving. And this is the dumb part. I'll just say dumb because that's what you feel. You can't even use it when you're at a stoplight or at a traffic stop or when you're just in traffic bumper to bumper and you're stopped. That's crazy. You're allowed to use voice control. There's some things you can do on your car stereo. But I was just like, this is dumb, and this is bothering me. I don't naturally follow rules. I don't know if you think I'm a rule follower. I'm not. I'm not a type 1 Enneagram. That's not me. I'm a type 7. We hate rules. All right? So I hate this, and I'm like, but I know God gave us this government, and they have the right to do this, and it's for safety. It's not a sin. They're not telling me to do something that's a sin. So this is really bothering me. This is really tough for me. And I'm not bringing this up to make you anxious or make you be OCD about your phone now or whatever. I'm bringing it up because this hits home and it exposes the heart. It exposed the part of my heart that wasn't fully surrendered. That's what it did. That resistance was exposing the little part of my heart that was saying, I know my way. God doesn't deserve to tell me who to follow, and I should be able to read through this and see how dumb this law is, right? That's my part of my heart that's not surrendered. And I need to do that every day. I haven't just decided that and now I'm good. And now you guys better catch up and get where I'm at. No, I need to think about this in lots of situations. It's been really tough. I mean, I drive up 501 every day and it's back-to-back traffic and I'm just sitting there and I'm bored and I get distracted real fast. And what if I want to check my calendar real quick? Or what if I forgot something else? Or what if I just need to refresh Facebook Messenger? Why can't I just do it quick? Hold it down here, no one can see it. It's not even a fine. The first full year, they just give you warnings, it says. Just a warning, no big deal. I'm not just trying to stress you out, like I said, but who is your true king? And what is our King that we want to follow asking us to do? Leo Tolstoy said that today, as in days past, there's no way to tell from a person's life, from his deeds, whether or not he's a believer. So your question is, can anyone tell by how I obey the government and how I talk about the government, can anyone tell that I'm honoring Jesus as the true King? Can anyone tell? We don't have time to get into all these unanswered questions. There's a lot of things we could talk about. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of specific situations we could go into. My heart is that if you want to follow Jesus' way, you'll seek him with all your heart, and you'll pray these questions. You'll talk about them in small groups from church, and you'll let that guide you. I don't have time to get in every little situation. I mean, I do want to acknowledge some questions. There's these huge challenges. Some people deal with abusive authority. What about that? Do you obey them? Do you not obey them? What about corrupt leaders? What about if the laws are unreasonable? Like, what about OSHA regulations? What about the dumb fact that car seats expire? You know, are they really going to notice in another month? There are tough situations, right? What if you have a small business? I don't know what that's like. That's got to be really hard to think about how to follow the government there. Anabaptists have been granted exemptions before, right? Like health insurance. We don't have to always follow the government's laws because they gave us exemptions for health insurance. So what do you do about that? I mean, just because you have an exemption for one thing, does that mean you can have exemptions to the law in whichever way you see fit? This is really tough. And what about if you get to a law that's really unjust? Like, think about the Jim Crow segregation laws or something like that. Like, I don't think Christians should have followed those separation black and white laws like that. Like, obviously those are racist laws, and we should refuse to follow those laws because they would cause you to sin. So, but what about that? What if you don't know if a law is just or unjust? And that gets really tough. Or if the government's even requiring you to do something that's sin. Like, that's tough. How do you handle that? These questions are real. And if you're struggling, I encourage you to just come back to the most important thing. Don't let that overwhelm you and just throw up your hands and say this is not worth thinking about. If you're struggling, go back to the most important thing, which is King Jesus. Ask King Jesus to help you do as he did and learn how to put that into whatever situation you're in. Don't fret about the details. Come back to the King. In conclusion, this is tough. This is us living in daily tension between our will and my way and God's way. That's what this is about. It's not about the government. It's about me living in the daily tension. And it doesn't go away. You get older, I don't know, Al, like, do you still have that struggle between, like, my way or God's way? Like, of course. Like, that's a constant struggle. And I think this message is really about who do I want to give kingship in my life? Myself or Jesus? This is normal to have this daily tension, and it's important to acknowledge it and say, I'm going to daily give myself up and daily carry my cross. So when that girl with the McDonald's drinks opens her door right in front of me and causes me to crash my bike, I felt that tension between my desire to retaliate and the kindness I know Jesus would show, and that tension happens all the time. It's all the way back to the Garden of Eden when they said, I know better than God does, or I want to know better than God does. Our whole life is this struggle. Take up the cross daily. So this is not my soapbox. This sermon is not just a soapbox of following government's rules. I'm not going to sit in the back seat, and when Scott drives, I'm not going to be like looking over, what's that speedometer doing, buddy? Like, no, that's not it. You're missing the point, okay? That's straining out a gnat to swallow a camel. Actually, I don't know if that's in context. It wasn't in my notes. Don't hold me to that. That's missing the point, right? The point is not whether or not we're creeping over every law out there. The point is, which part of that heart do I have that I haven't given up? And do things like traffic laws expose some of that selfishness that I still have going on, that I maybe need to give up? Am I willing I'm on a journey, but am I willing to turn that cold, animalistic, selfish part of my heart over to God and ask him to form me into who I was meant to be, his son or daughter, reflecting his glory to the world? People don't need another reminder that they're not good enough Christians. That's not what this is. It's not a reminder to do better or else. What you need is a refocus on Jesus, your King, the good King, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sitting in victory on the throne. And that King Jesus has given us authority, and by honoring them, we honor our true authority, which is King Jesus. So don't get overwhelmed with inadequacy you have with these laws. Just turn your heart to Jesus again. Recognize him as the true King. Am I willing to surrender to him again today, seeing how he was a king but under Caesar? Do I see how Christ redeemed power, going the extra mile and exposing injustice for what it was through suffering love? Will I choose today to honor the King Jesus by honoring those he's granted to be in power over me? Looking to Jesus does no good, though, if it's not followed by real-life obedience. So I'm convinced that how we respond to earthly authority in our lives is directly related to how much of our heart is surrendered to God. And that's why I'm passionate about this. Not because I care about the government or whatever. Okay? This is because I think how we respond to earthly authority reveals a lot about how much of our heart is surrendered to God. It just does. And I know we have trauma. Some people have a hard time getting there. But it matters. Look to your true King Jesus and see his example to willingly be a king under Caesar and redefining power through suffering love and how he honored his Father's will. Jesus is a leader I want to follow. Is your heart surrendered to his way? So just straight up, taking it home, what are you going to do about your disregard for traffic laws? What am I going to do? It's not just about looking to Jesus. What we do matters. And can I remind myself every day by doing some stupid thing like slowing down, can I remind my heart every day who the true King is? Is that an opportunity to remind my heart who the true King is? And tell my children that. Dad, why are you going so slow? Well, you know what? My true King is Jesus. He showed me a better way, and he said, obey the government. And can I use that as a way to turn people to Jesus? Why do you do that? That's dumb. Why do you follow those regulations? You guys are so nitpicky. My true King Jesus is who I'm following. If you're resistant to this teaching, if you're feeling burdened or anxious, here's what to do. Quick steps. It doesn't take much, but today, right now, turn over that little part of your selfish heart that you still have. Turn it over to Jesus. That little part of your will that you're holding on to, turn it over to the true honorable King who loves you and has adopted you as his own. This isn't a once and done surrender. Jesus says, take up your cross daily and surrender. So let the next time you want to reach for your phone or go too fast or whatever, let that cause your heart to remember who your true King is and why he is so worthy of being followed. And when you fail, which you're gonna, remember that you don't have to be perfect because Jesus was perfect for you. And he's our true King, and he's a righteous King. Live in that grace today. Let's pray. Father God, this is so tough, so hard for us to know how to honor you and honor authority, and it gets to the heart of who we are. It gets to the real piece of resistance of our will. And I just pray that you would teach us more and more every day, even in little ways. Teach us how to give our heart over to you and help us to have the courage to do that. Help us to have the courage to go the extra mile and think about how that applies to today. God, be with us. Give us lots of grace. Give us lots of patience for ourselves too. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.